Setsuko Hara is often called the eternal virgin of Japanese cinema, an actress whose serene beauty and complex performances embodied both modernity and tradition in post-war Japan. While her collaborations with directors like Ozu and Naruse defined her legacy, her career was something that was actually forced upon her. Considered to be one of the greatest Japanese actresses of all time, she mysteriously disappeared from the silver screen in 1963 and secluded herself in her home until her death in 2015. In this video, we'll explore how Hara's subtle, mask-like acting style shaped some of Japan's most enduring films, and how she became a symbol of her era, and why she chose to retire at the height of her career. Setsuko Hara was born Masai Aida in 1920, the youngest of 7 children. Her family was financially comfortable until the Great Depression, which hit Japan particularly hard. Her elder sister was married to Hisatora Kumagai, a rising film director who encouraged Masai to drop out of school at 14 to pursue a film career. Creepy. By 1934, Japan was still transitioning to talking pictures, and studios were actively searching for new talent in a changing cinema landscape. Hara was cast in a few pictures, but got her big break in the worst possible vehicle, a Nazi propaganda film. Look, when you heard Japan in 1934, you probably knew where this was going. The Nazi regime was working on strengthening relations with Imperial Japan and wanted to make a film that would improve the German people's view of the Japanese. The New Earth was a co-production directed by Arnold Fanck and Mansaku Itami, the father of famous Japanese actor and director Juzo Itami. Though the film was poorly received in Japan, thank God, it thrust Hara into the international spotlight. She traveled with her brother-in-law, again creepy, to Europe and the US for a promotional tour. After the New Earth, Hara's specialty became tragic heroines. As the war progressed, the Japanese military became more involved in the film industry and passed a law in 1939 to promote the production of newsreels supporting the war effort and propaganda films. By 1941, the military seized control over all the film studios in the country. Thus, much of Hara's films during this time were propaganda movies. After the war, the Japanese film industry faced a problem. Even though the American occupation forces were given the power to censor any film they wanted for any reason, they were much more lenient than the Japanese military censors and encouraged films to promote democratic values. So the entire industry had to recalibrate. Thankfully, Hara was particularly well suited for the changing times. Just by looking at her, we can see she has a very modern look, almost Western. She's beautiful, but not in a traditional sense, like other actresses from the era like Kinuyo Tanaka or Machiko Kyo. This modern look would help her get roles that evaluated women's changing position in a society recovering from World War II and reevaluating what it meant to be Japanese in a newly defeated and democratic country. Well, she had the looks and talent, but what kind of projects would even be available? No Regrets for Our Youth is loosely based on the real-life Kyoto University incident of the 1930s, where academics and students faced government suppression for their leftist views. The film begins with Yukie, here played by Hara, the daughter of a progressive university professor who is dismissed from his position for his liberal ideals. As political tensions rise, Yukie falls in love with Noge, a passionate leftist activist who opposes Japan's military regime. They marry, but their relationship is cut short when Noge is arrested for spying. After Noge is killed in custody, Yukie moves to his rural hometown, where she works alongside his parents in the rice fields. Despite facing hostility from the villagers due to her husband's traitorous reputation, Yukie perseveres. The film ends with the war ending and Yukie's father being welcomed back to lecture at the university. Yukie visits her home, but goes back to live with her in-laws, having found meaning and dignity in her labor. As you can imagine, Japanese films before 1945 did not openly talk about democracy or individual freedom. No Regrets was one of the first post-war films to openly talk about democracy, criticize the Japanese government for its role in the war, and showcased a level of freedom of expression not seen in years. This made it a hit with audiences and was an example of what cinema could be in this new country. Hara, already a famous actress by this point, was central to the film's success. Despite this, the film is heavily flawed, and these flaws actually center around Hara's character. Yukie's motivations throughout the film are just difficult to understand. It's never clear why she loves Noge, as they spend very little time together before getting married, and she doesn't seem particularly invested in his goals. Her choice to work on her in-laws' farm doesn't necessarily live up to her husband's memory either. Japanese film critics also noted her confusing behavior. Before and during the war, Hara was considered a glamorous figure, so scenes of her covered in mud and planting rice would have been shocking to Japanese audiences. This casting choice was clearly an attempt to go against type, yet it doesn't suit Hara's strengths as she was never known for her physicality. Ultimately, Yukie's character arc feels disconnected from the film's democratic themes, making her motivations harder to grasp. Kurosawa didn't write women great. That's going to be a recurring theme on this channel. But he was also ordered by the studio to rewrite the screenplay because it resembled another film already in production, so that can explain the unevenness. At first, it seemed that Hara could be a fixture in Kurosawa's films. See, many Japanese directors in the classic era would hire the same actors for their pictures, and the most famous Kurosawa collaborator was Mifune, but if you've seen even 2 of his pictures, you've probably noticed the same people. But while Kurosawa was still making a name for himself, another post-war director was looking to revitalize his career. If you were to compare 2 directors from Japan's golden age of cinema, Kurosawa and Ozu couldn't have been more different. Ozu started out in the silent era making comedies focused on the working class, while Kurosawa debuted during the war years with period dramas. Kurosawa was constantly pushing the boundaries of what he could do with the camera, while Ozu was simplifying and refining his style. Kurosawa focused on exceptional individuals fighting an unjust world, while Ozu pointed his camera at the average family who always gave in to traditional values rather than confront them. Kurosawa gained international recognition when Rashomon won the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival in 1951, and his home studio Toho released his films internationally. Ozu's studio, Shochiku, felt his films were quote-unquote too Japanese and typically didn't show them overseas. Kurosawa worked in a variety of genres, noir, samurai, drama, and was always conscious of societal issues, while Ozu made contemporary, basically apolitical dramas. The concerns of the home are the primary focus of most of his films. By 1949, Kurosawa was delivering hits like No Regrets for Our Youth, Drunken Angel, and Stray Dog, all classics of the post-war era. In contrast, Ozu found himself in a funk. He released only 2 films between 1945 and 1948, neither of which garnered much attention from critics or audiences. While Kurosawa was the new it boy, Ozu was being labeled as finished. At this point, Ozu desperately needed a hit. It was at this time that he cast Hara in his upcoming project, Late Spring. The film follows Noriko, a devoted daughter in her late 20s, borderline old maid by the 1940s Japanese standards, who lives with her widowed father. Pressured by societal expectations, her father encourages her to marry, despite her desire to remain by his side. She eventually concedes and moves in with her new husband, leaving her father to age alone. Late Spring turned out to be the success that revitalized his career and would cement Hara as a fixture of Ozu's films. It was named the top film of the year by Japan's most prestigious film magazine, the Kinema Junpo. Gee, how do I explain what the Kinema Junpo is to normies? It's a Japanese film magazine that is as prestigious as the Oscars, but people respect their opinion. It's hard to overstate the importance of Late Spring to Japanese cinema. It is one of the most studied films of all time. I mean, look at the Wikipedia page analysis for this film. Still going. However, Hara had personal problems with the character. Hara considered herself a modern woman, preferring Western films, and admired the assertiveness of their female characters. She was especially inspired by Ingrid Bergman. Though the film was a big hit, she couldn't really identify with the character, saying, "I certainly don't like the character of the daughter in this film." I'm not saying foreign films had better female representation than Japanese ones. Hollywood roles for women were also limiting. However, classic Japanese films have a tendency to focus on women's suffering without offering characters a path to escape or overcome their struggles. A large portion of leading roles for women in this era fell into 2 categories: the sad housewife or the oppressed sex worker, and Mistress was a popular supporting. While these stories were clearly meant to be critical of women's low status in the 1950s and earlier, they rarely imagined what women's lives could be with greater economic and social opportunities. Watching film after film about women crushed by societal constraints can feel disempowering. Like doom scrolling, it leaves you overwhelmed by the scale of the problems. I can imagine an actress who considered herself to be modern being disillusioned with these kinds of roles. Well, she would be able to play a strong-willed character But, well, let's just say be careful what you wish for. Akira Kurosawa's The Idiot is a psychological drama set in post-World War II Japan, adapted from Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel of the same name. The story follows Kameda, played by Masayuki Mori, a man whose experiences during the war, including narrowly escaping execution, have left him with deep emotional trauma and an almost saint-like innocence. Upon returning to his hometown in Hokkaido, he learns that a beautiful young woman, Taeko Nasu, played by Hara, is being married off by her former lover who began exploiting her when she was only 14. At the engagement party, Kameda is the only one willing to show her genuine kindness, and he asks her to marry him. She ultimately leaves with the volatile Akama, played by Toshiro Mifune, fearing that she would ruin Kameda. Later, Kameda earns the affections of another woman, Ayako, played by Yoshiko Kuga, who comes from a good family but is immature and capricious. Ayako becomes jealous of Kameda's love for Taeko and forces a confrontation between the three. Unfortunately, he is unable to choose between the two women, nor is he able to save Taeko, who is stabbed by Akama at the end of the film. He and Akama go insane together, or die, it's not really clear, and Ayako laments that she was an idiot for not loving as purely as Kameda. The end. So there are a lot of problems with The Idiot, and the first is the source material. You see, I actually read The Idiot a long time ago, and I don't have a copy of it laying around, but from what I can remember, it's not that great of a book. The central theme of a true Christian who loves their neighbor unconditionally would be seen as an idiot in modern-day materialistic society is very profound, but doesn't really come together in the text. Second, this goes for all of Dostoevsky's books. The novel's main focus is the psychology of its characters. Long passages about philosophy and theology fill the novel. After part 1, the narrative completely lacks any structure, moving from the ramblings of one character to the next until basically the climax. Let's take this passage for example. A raging drunk lawyer is trying to have a hypothetical discussion about whether it would have been more moral to eat children or monks in the Middle Ages. As you can see, it goes on for a while. Though this is some people's idea of literature, this is just not the type of material that lends itself well to the screen. Another major problem with the film was that it was cut significantly. The original film was supposed to be released in 2 parts, but after a poorly received screening of a 4-hour and 25-minute version, it was cut down to 2 hours and 46 minutes. Still ungodly long, but with almost an hour and 40 minutes shorn off, it's not really what Kurosawa had intended. Though Hara's performance got mixed reviews, I think it actually stands out as one of her strongest. She has an intensity here that none of her previous pictures ever really allowed her, and her subtlety works a lot better here than it did in No Regrets for Our Youth. The sheer pain in her eyes as Akama openly barters for her hand as if she were a piece of meat. How she breaks a vase in a futile effort to take control of her life, and the sadness when Kameda shows her the compassion and understanding she's been denied her whole life. It could be that, as a Western story, she was finally able to break free from the conventions of traditional ideas of Japanese women. Like No Regrets, she was playing against type. As the so-called eternal virgin, it's shocking to see her as a victim of sexual exploitation, fighting against a society so willing to put all the blame on her. Unfortunately, the risk didn't pay off. The film wasn't a box office bomb. Hara's celebrity ensured its moderate financial success, but it received overwhelmingly negative reviews and was Kurosawa's only film of the 1950s not to be featured in Kinema Junpo's top 10 list. This is kind of the equivalent of, say, Steven Spielberg making an Oscar bait film that doesn't get a Best Picture nom. If you're interested in learning more about everything wrong with The Idiot, please check out my blog post on the topic. Yes, I also have a blog, link in the description. This was also Hara's final collaboration with Kurosawa. In 1951, the same year that The Idiot came out, she starred in Early Summer, another Ozu picture about a girl named Noriko getting married. It received widespread critical acclaim and, like Late Spring, was named the best film of the year by Kinema Junpo. The message was clear. The Ozu formula was working, the Kurosawa one was not. Hara went on to star in 6 of Ozu's films, each a masterpiece and a classic of world cinema. She would become a symbol of her era, a time when women were gaining more freedom and opportunities while still being constrained by traditional expectations. However, she became typecast in the process. Her characters' lives were almost always defined by their marital status, whether unmarried daughter, a wife, mother, or widow. Why did Hara excel so much in domestic dramas? While she was undoubtedly a talented actress, I don't think she was ever 100% comfortable in front of the camera. Acting for Hara was a means to support her family, it was never her true passion. However, in domestic dramas, this discomfort translates seamlessly into her character struggles. For example, Noriko doesn't want to get married, and Hara doesn't want to be in this movie, yet both are trapped by their circumstances, forced to grin and bear it. In The Cinema of Mikio Naruse, Women and Japanese Modernity, Catherine Russell writes, she excelled in expressing highly contradictory emotions. She can be at once hopeful and doubtful at marriage proposals. She laughs when she is most sad and cries when she is most happy. Hara's performance, in which gesture, facial expression, and glances say far more than her words, has a mask-like aura. The mask for Hara constitutes a kind of doubleness, as if her well-proportioned beauty were only one layer, the public one, of a more complex personality that remains hidden beneath. This acting style might explain why Hara never quite fit into the Kurosawa cinematic universe. Kurosawa was a distinctly masculine filmmaker, centering his stories on samurai, cops, yakuza, businessmen, or other exceptional male figures, usually played by Toshiro Mifune. Women in his films are secondary, and Hara's enigmatic, mask-like presence feels out of place in the hands of a director who is unable to understand the female psyche. It's not like Kurosawa consciously intended to be done with Hara after the failure of The Idiot. After all, the failure was his. She was actually his first choice to play the samurai's wife in Rashomon. For those of you who don't know what Rashomon is, it is basically on level, if not more important, than Late Spring in terms of its influence on world cinema. Her brother-in-law, Kumagai again, thought she was ill-suited for the part and told her not to do it. Look, we have no way of knowing how Hara would have been in Rashomon, and I think it's weird that her brother-in-law had so much influence on her career even when she was in her 30s, but Hara was never an energetic actress, nor did she make big decisions, unlike Machiko Kyo, who ended up getting the role. Naruse also deserves an honorary mention. This video is already super long, and I don't want to bog myself down in the Naruse cinematic universe, but he is another director who utilizes Hara in a very similar way to Ozu. She's usually an unhappy wife trapped in a bad marriage, thus furthering the persona of a woman trapped between modernity and tradition. As a self-described modern woman, Hara had grown disillusioned with the film industry by this point. She was repeatedly cast as women confined to the domestic sphere, an experience all too common in Japan, but not something she could relate to. Unlike her characters who were unable to work outside the home due to limited economic opportunities and were financially dependent on families or husbands, Hara was a career woman. She had been working since she was 14, pursuing a thankless career to support her own family. In fact, unlike most Japanese women in the 40s and 50s who needed to get married to secure financial stability, marriage would have damaged Hara's ability to support her family. Of course, the media spread rumors about her sexuality, which may or may not have been true, and that she was in love with Ozu. We're gonna put a pin in that. But in the Japanese film industry, when actresses got married, they were expected to retire. Of course, there were exceptions, but for the most part, that was the rule. A lot of Japanese actresses from the 40s and 50s never married, and it didn't become normal until the 60s. Hara would eventually leave the industry, but not for marriage. 1961's The End of Summer was Ozu and Hara's final film collaboration. Hara plays the widowed daughter of a sake brewer being pressured to get remarried. As Hara got older, Ozu began casting her as mothers and giving her characters less focus in the story. Ozu would die 2 years later in 1963. Soon after, Hara announced her retirement from acting. The timing was interesting, to be sure. Could Hara have been so grief-stricken by the death of the man that she loved that she could not imagine working again? Probably not. Other than rumors, no one who worked with them knew of their relationship being anything other than professional. Also, when Ozu was a teenager, he got kicked out of his high school dorm for writing a love letter to a boy. He also then dedicated his life to making movies about women getting married and in unhappy marriages. Connect the dots. While doing research for this video, I noticed Hara's final film role was in Shushingura, aka 47 Ronin, released on November 3rd, 1962. Ozu didn't show signs of cancer until April the following year and died in December of 1963, meaning she effectively retired a year before Ozu died and 6 months before he even got sick. It could be that she meant to retire around this time anyway, but didn't make an official announcement out of respect for Ozu. As we discussed earlier, Setsuko Hara did not like her character Noriko from Late Spring. Given this, it's likely she wasn't fond of any of her other roles in Ozu's films, since she essentially plays the same character and gives the same performance throughout his filmography. Even in his later films, when she portrays a mother, because she's older now, what else is she gonna do? Her character's personality remains unchanged. Hara often said she wanted to play a strong-willed woman, but it never really panned out. She was especially interested in playing Hosokawa Gracia, a samurai woman and Christian convert who was killed during an attempt to take her hostage. This is the woman who Mariko from Shogun is based on. She wanted her brother-in-law to direct. Something was going on there, but he was pushed out of the industry after the war and the project never got off the ground. So by 1963, we have an actress who doesn't like acting, is not getting the roles she believes in, is over 40, in an industry that heavily values youth and beauty, and who just lost her most successful collaborator. With the heights of her career seemingly behind her and the prospect of playing wife and mother roles that she can't stand, this seemed like a good time to make an exit. Hara retreated to Kamakura, a town south of Tokyo, began using her birth name Masaida again, and lived in seclusion in her brother-in-law's home. Toho, her home studio, hoping this was some sort of midlife crisis, continued to keep her on contract until 1968, despite her continuing rejections to go back to the screen. Like a ghost, her presence was occasionally known at funerals. In 1968, she attended the wake of Kogo Noda, the screenwriter of most of Ozu's post-war films. She sent flowers under her birth name to Mikio Naruse's family following his death in 1969. Her last known appearance was in 1993 when she secretly attended the wake of Chishu Ryu, the actor who played her father in Late Spring and co-starred with her in most of her Ozu films. For 52 years until her death in 2015, she gave no interviews and made no official appearances. According to the article, The Truth About Hara Setsuko, Behind the Legend of the Golden Age Film Star, none of her neighbors saw her in her later years. When she was young, Hara had talked about how she wanted to do as much foreign travel as possible after she retired. But it seemed that she didn't go anywhere, either abroad or in Japan. When she was elderly, she didn't even go out to eat. She apparently spent all her time reading books and newspapers. She was really strong-willed. She tried to bury Hara Setsuko and go back to being Aida Masae, but you could say that she carried her screen persona through to the end. By avoiding the public gaze to an extreme, she ended up preserving Hara Setsuko's beautiful image. Several magazines were able to secretly photograph her over the years, but it seems like the images were never circulated around the internet. I was able to find one photo of her when she was 80 that looks legit, but I'm not going to show it here because I think it takes away from the effect of her retirement. The finality of it, the sense of mystery her disappearance created. Plus, unlike photos of celebrities who actually crave the spotlight, it seems voyeuristic. Hara wanted to be left alone, and even looking at photos of her in her old age just feels like an invasion of the privacy she so desperately craved. Like, by the end of her life, she barely left her house. I barely lasted 4 months in quarantine. I think it's clear that she wanted to be left alone. With actresses from the golden age of Hollywood, the tragedy is frequently that they didn't make enough films, that studio executives threw a wrench in their careers just because they got older. Many of these women wanted to continue working and starring in films, but for Setsuko Hara, she became a monumental star almost against her will and is forever associated with characters she could not identify with. Ultimately, she retreated from public life to protect herself from a world obsessed with her image. She may have seen this as the only way to gain control over her life. Like the characters she portrayed, we can never fully understand her. What did she really want from life? How did she view her career? What did she do during the 52 years she spent in that house in Kamakura? In the end, these secrets remain hers alone. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you liked my take, please consider liking and subscribing. I'll be creating more content about Japanese and Asian media, so let me know what you'd like me to explore next.